Joining me now is Ron Nehring, Ted Cruz's California campaign chairman and the GOP's former California campaign chairman, and a man who just got off about a 500-mile road trip driving up to D.C. from South Carolina. So thank you for being with me.
My pleasure. Great to be here.
To many, that sounded last night like a victory speech. And yet you had, Cruz about 10 points behind Trump, and you had him losing with evangelicals by 6 points. A lot of folks would have taken the evangelical vote there, especially on a week when, Donald Trump gets in a spat with the Pope. What happened?
Well, just like in Iowa, where Ted Cruz took on everybody and won, in this case, in South Carolina, Ted Cruz took on the entire establishment. Marco Rubio had the endorsement of Governor Nikki Haley, Senator Tim Scott, Trey Gowdy, the congressman, just about the entire establishment, and then jumping up and down on Ted Cruz's head, and he tied Marco Rubio for second place.
Look, he didn't tie Marco Rubio for second place, according to the numbers.
Well, it's a virtual tie. Look, it's a difference of about 1,000 votes out of 800,000 votes cast.
Okay, but it's not a tie.
Well, it's close, and so we can go back and forth on that. But the reality is, at the end of the day, it was not us who said that we had to win South Carolina. It was Marco Rubio who said in his 3-2-1 plan that he shared with all of his donors that he had to come in third in Iowa, which he did. He had to come in second in New Hampshire, which he didn't. He came in a distant fifth, and he had to win in South Carolina. Even with all of the establishment support that he had in South Carolina, he couldn't win. And so if he couldn't win in South Carolina, in what state is Marco Rubio going to win in order to become competitive in the nomination? The reality is, if you want to defeat Donald Trump, you have to go with Ted Cruz, because we're the only candidate who's defeated Donald Trump so far, and we're the only candidate who can go all the way.
I hear you, but at the same time, you're talking about winning Iowa, which your camp did. But if you look at the last two elections, look who else won Iowa. You had Huckabee in 2008, Santorum in 2012. That does not a presidential contender in a general make.
No, but if you take a look at history, what's clear is that in order to win the nomination, you have to be able to win one of the early states. Only two candidates have done that so far. That's Donald Trump and Ted Cruz. Marco Rubio hasn't done that, and there's only one state left, and it's not looking too good for him to win in Nevada. So if you want to look at history, that's certainly one thing to look at, being able to win an early state. And we're on with what we've said. We've said from the outset that Ted Cruz needs to win one of the early states. We've done that, and now we're going to go on to March 1st. What's really interesting to me is what Marco Rubio said this morning, which is when he was pressed repeatedly on which state he's able to win, he cited only Florida, which votes on March 15th. But that's not going to work in order to defeat Donald Trump, because 45% of the delegates will already have been chosen by the time we get to the first state which Marco Rubio says he can win, which sounds like he's already conceding Nevada on Tuesday.
So let's talk about this issue of trustworthiness, right? Because this is important to voters on both sides of the aisle, and there are folks increasingly questioning Ted Cruz's trustworthiness. Let's listen.
Well, I've said he's been lying, because if you say something that isn't true and you say it over and over again and you know that it's not true, there's no other word for it.
You are the single biggest liar. You probably are worse than Jeb Bush. Ted Cruz goes out. You talk about liars.
For a number of weeks now, Ted Cruz has just been telling lies. Right. He lied about Ben Carson in Iowa. He lies about Planned Parenthood. He lies about marriage. He's lying about all sorts of things, and now he makes things up.
I have never, ever met a person that lies more than Ted Cruz.
Okay, granted, a lot of it coming from his competitors, but let's look at what the voters say. In this exit poll last night there in South Carolina, you've got who ran the most unfair campaign, Trump 39%, followed by Cruz 33%. Are you worried about that? Any credibility problem?
Well, it's no surprise that when you challenge the Washington cartel, when you come to Washington, D.C. and challenge a leadership in both parties, and then you're in a strong position to become the Republican nominee for president, people are going to say bad things about you. That shouldn't be a surprise. What's so surprising is that Marco Rubio reacts so poorly to people challenging him on his record on amnesty. Look, Marco Rubio has a record. He ran for the Senate in the state of Florida as a Tea Party candidate, as a conservative candidate. He came to Washington, D.C. He betrayed that by signing on to the the Rubio-Schumer amnesty bill, doing Barack Obama's bidding on providing an amnesty that he said he wouldn't do. And then whenever anyone calls him on his record, he gets mad and he says that's a lie and so on and so forth. Marco Rubio should just stand up and take responsibility for his position, which is that he's a liberal on the issue of amnesty. This is an issue that's of concern to many people because, if anything, that goes to the issue of trust, because he said he wouldn't do that. And then for him to step forward and essentially do Barack Obama's bidding on an issue that's of great concern to Republicans, particularly now, is really quite shocking.
But I'm talking about Ted Cruz. I'm talking about your candidate's credibility and concerns there that the voters show in that polling.
Well, I think that what my concern is that you have Marco Rubio and Donald Trump both echoing the same line. And, well, of course they're going to say something like that because we're their competition. Of course they're going to. Both of those candidates have one thing in common, and that is they want to avoid having to answer for
this poll. The voters said it in this poll.
Right. Well, certainly, look, people have to make their own decisions as we go forward. And ultimately, they're listening to all of the candidates. And it's not a surprise that the tactic that our opponents refer to or wind up resorting to is to simply, jump up and down and try to call Ted Cruz a liar as a means of diverting attention from their own liberal records. Donald Trump is a Manhattan liberal who has supported partial birth abortion. He did so in that famous interview with Tim Russert, where he said he had New York values and so on. And Marco Rubio, in terms of his leading the fight for amnesty and the like, these are candidates who need to try to distract attention from their own records, and that's the issue which they're going to try to bring up. We're going to continue to talk about Ted Cruz's record, which is a proud record that both in terms of his time in the Senate and his time as Solicitor General of the state of Texas. He has a record of accomplishment. He's taken on the status quo in Washington, and he's taken on the leadership of both parties. That's a record to be proud of.
All right, Ron Nehring, we have to leave it there. I hope you'll come back, though. I wish we had more time. Thank you very much.
You bet.